Good morning and welcome to the garden. I'm glad you're here with us in spring. Can you believe it finally arrived? I'm so glad. Woo! Anne Lamott has a recent book out that's entitled Small Victories, and the subtitle is Spotting Improbable Moments of Grace. And if I were to try to summarize exactly what the book's about in a few words, I think I would have to say it's about forgiveness and her journey toward trying to learn to forgive. And as I thought about that, I thought, that probably applies to all of us, because at one time or another in the course of our lives, we've probably been hurt, we've been wronged, and we've had to travel that journey to learn to forgive. Now, our journey will not be identical to hers, but there are probably some things we can think about on this whole idea of forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is a word we throw around all the time, but I want to make sure we're on the same page and understand what we're talking about. And I'm going to share two definitions with you. One came out of an article from Mayo Clinic that says it's a decision to let go of resentment and thoughts of revenge. And note that word decision. It's a conscious kind of thing. And then Wikipedia has a more elaborate definition that goes like this. It's an intentional and voluntary process by which a victim undergoes a change in feelings and attitudes regarding an offense, lets go of negative emotions such as revenge, with an increased ability to wish the offender well. There are several key elements there when we talk about forgiveness that we need to pay attention to. One, it's intentional. We make a conscious decision that it's time to let go and begin to forgive. There is a change in our feelings and in our attitudes toward the one who has hurt us or wronged us in one way or the other. We try to let go of those negative emotions to the point that we then can wish for the well-being and work for the well-being of the one who has offended us. Now, if the truth be told, forgiveness is ultimately for us, because when we hold on to a grudge, we're the ones who suffer. We're the ones who are hurt the most. We begin to let the offender have power over us, and we continue to be the constant victim. Someone has said that being unwilling to forgive is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. It's simply not going to happen. Anne Lamott calls forgiveness, the lack of forgiveness, as leprosy on the inside. It's not a very pretty picture any way you put it. Well, there are always repercussions that come from not being willing to and not really learning to forgive for times that we've been wronged. We will bring anger and that resentment and that bitterness into every relationship that we enter. And that will eventually alienate us and isolate us from other people. And it doesn't move us in a very forward way. We keep holding on to the past. And we may even descend to the point of wanting revenge. We want to get back for someone who's hurt us in one way or another. But before we think about revenge and move in that direction, we probably need to remember the words of Confucius, who said, "Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves." Indeed, it's that deadly, it's that painful. So let's not move in that direction of revenge, and let's try to move toward forgiveness instead. There are certainly other things that happen when we fail to forgive. It does tend to isolate us. We tend to stay in the past. We won't let go of those past hurts. We can even become depressed and think that all of life is unfair and unjust. And if we are people who are spiritual people, we may begin to feel out of sync or off balance because we're not living in sync with what really matters to us and what we think is important. And so that's why it's really important to be able to forgive, to learn to forgive. But let me warn you, it's a very difficult thing to do. It can take a long, long time. It doesn't happen immediately. One of the clips you saw, and something we sometimes see, is an instance where, well, for instance, someone's partner walks away and goes to be with someone else. And friends of that person begin to say, well, you need to forgive and move on. You need to forgive and move on. Well, it can't happen that quickly. We need to allow the time for the processing of all of this. For one thing, the one who's been wronged has to grieve that loss. has to sort out all of the feelings that come as a result of it, and begin to try to lessen the feelings of pain and hurt and ill will, and try to replace those. So it takes some time for that to happen. But when we do allow ourselves to work through the process and really work through it, it will be as though we've emerged from a dark hole into the light. It's as though we've been freed from all of those things that hold us back and have held us down. And there are wonderful benefits that come when we finally learn to forgive and really become more forgiving people. For one thing, our relationships tend to be healthier. We certainly have less stress and anxiety in our lives. We have a better immune system. It even helps us physically. And heart health is better as well. Now, when we think about forgiveness, I think we probably need to consider various perspectives. And frankly, we fit in all of these perspectives. To this point, I've talked more about the fact that we have been wronged and we have been hurt, and that we need to forgive the person who has hurt us in one way or another. But there are other perspectives too. We are often the people who commit the wrong. We say the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing, we hurt someone else, sometimes deliberately, but most often it's not that way at all. It's just simply that we make mistakes. We're human beings. We're flawed beings. I've always liked a phrase that, I guess it's a chapter title, that Lewis Smedes has in his book on forgiveness. And it says, "Forgiveness fits faulty people." We're all faulty people. We all need forgiveness. And along with that, we need to forgive ourselves. So there's forgiving others when they hurt us. It's being forgiven when we've hurt someone else. And it's forgiving ourselves. And then there's also the nature of the relationship that happens between the one who's been hurt and the one who's done the hurting. And sometimes there can be reconciliation, but it's not necessarily so. And forgiveness does not mean condoning, it does not mean forgetting, and it doesn't necessarily mean reconciling. Say, for instance, there is a major thing, a serious thing, like violence or abuse. Typically, forgiveness is possible after, I've never been there, but I can't imagine how hard it is to get to the point of being able to forgive, and yet it's important to do that. But protection is the most important thing, protection from future harm. And so we want to be sure that we make that exists in that relationship. And so reconciliation is probably not likely, and in many events at least, probably shouldn't be likely. But I don't want to talk about the extreme things so much today, as to think about the things that you and I encounter on a daily basis when we really do hurt someone else, for example. And we know that we've hurt someone else. They've said it or we've been aware of it at the time. What do we do? How do we move through this process? Well, I think the first thing is having that awareness of our words and our actions. And you know, the reality is sometimes we hurt those who are closest to us, and we hurt them the most. And those should be the people that we understand the most. We know when people are sort of super sensitive and that even the slightest remark can really be hurtful. We know folks who have tough skin too and who can deal with it a little bit better. But most important is that we always monitor our words and actions, that we are always living in the faithful way and trying to do that which is most positive, most loving, in the best way that we know how. And so it really is important that we are aware of that, we monitor what we're doing, and we make amends. We try to make it right. We try to get things back to a good place and a positive place between us. And then we work on ourselves. We want to improve the way we've been living and try to vow that kind of thing is not going to happen again, knowing full well that as human beings something's going to happen, and we're going to need to go through this process again. And then when it's time for us to forgive someone who's hurt us, it's a matter of working through that, of really being aware of what's happened, of sorting through all that's happened, of really trying to understand to the best of our ability, and then to be able to let it go so that we're not letting the past bog us down, but we can really live in the presence. Anne Lamott, as I mentioned, talked about her long journey for forgiveness. And throughout this book, she talks about how deep a grudge she held against her parents. She felt that her parents had failed her had failed her siblings and had failed each other. And that they were not the kind of parents she thought they should have been. And she struggled with that for years and years and had much anger within her as a result of that. And finally, she began to be aware that she was being pretty self-righteous about things, thinking that they were the only ones who ever operated that way, and that she had felt this need that she was right and they were wrong. And what she did was begin to soften a little bit and put a human face on her parents. And the one she had the most trouble with was her mother. And she talks about the huge grudge she had against her mother and how hard it was for her to learn to let it go. And finally she's able to write these words. Eventually I started having quieter thoughts about my mother, to see her through what the theologian Howard Thurman called quiet eyes. Not quiet eyes yet in my case, but quiet for me, and then quieter still. You see, forgiveness truly is a process. It takes time. It takes realizing we're all human beings and we all make mistakes. And it is that quiet eyes, quieter eyes, or what I like to think of as softened eyes toward the one who's wronged us and toward ourselves in that process. How do we get there? How do we ever get to the point of letting that soften in our hearts? And the only way I know it is through prayer. And that's really what the Bible passage we have this morning focuses on. Now this is the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples, told them when they asked how to learn to pray, he offered this. It shows up in both Luke's and Matthew's gospel. And I'm using the one out of Luke this morning. It's an abbreviated version from the one we normally share. But it says this. Jesus said to them, when you pray, say this, Father, and notice that's not denoting the gender of God. It really translates as Abba, which is more like daddy. It talks about the nature of the relationship, the closeness of the relationship. So, Father, Abba, may your holy name be honored. May your kingdom come. Give us day by day the food we need. Forgive us our sins, for we forgive everyone who does us wrong. And do not bring us to hard testing. Well, as I think about it, I think the only way we can get to the point of being able to forgive is to really pray and use the power of prayer to give us the courage to forgive, and the courage to forgive ourselves, and the courage to ask for and receive forgiveness. So to help us along that journey, why don't we share together this morning with the Lord's Prayer. I'm putting the classic version, the words are on screen, or they're going to be on screen. And would you pray it with me, please? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Forgive us our wrongs, as we forgive those who have wronged us. I hope we learn to be forgiving people.